The morning sun blazed over the Sierra Nevada mountains like a forge, turning the high desert air into something you could taste. Metal and dust, sweat and failure. At 8,500 feet, where the air grows thin and promises grow thinner, 6 elite Marines were learning the hardest lesson the Corps could teach. Perfection means nothing when the mountain refuses to cooperate. Master Sergeant Clayton Voss stood behind the firing line at Whiskey Range, his jaw clenched so tight his molars ached. 43 years old, 21 years in the Corps. A career built on precision discipline and an unshakable belief that if you did everything by the book would never let you down. The book was burning. Shot 151 screamed downrange at 3,000 feet per second. 1,700 yards away, the steel target stood silent and untouched. The bullet's impact kicked up dust somewhere in the valley beyond, joining the ghosts of 150 failures before it. Voss's radio crackled. Base command. The voice carried the weight of endings. Whiskey Range, this is actual. Status report. Voss keyed his mic. His voice came out flat, professional, dead. Actual Whiskey Range, qualification incomplete. Request timeline extension. Negative Whiskey Range, timeline is non-negotiable. 36 hours to qualification or replacement team deploys to Syria. How copy? Solid copy actual. The radio went silent. 36 hours. Might as well be 36 seconds when you couldn't hit a target you trained your entire life to hit. Behind Voss, his team was coming apart at the seams. Corporal Houston Reed, 24 years old and the youngest shooter on the line, stared at his ballistic computer like it had personally betrayed him. The device cost $85,000 of taxpayer money. It could calculate firing solutions faster than most men could think. Right now, it was an expensive paperweight. The data is perfect, Houston muttered, his Texas drawl tight with frustration. Wind speed verified, range verified, barometric pressure accounted for, Coriolis effect calculated, temperature, humidity, even the damn rotation of the earth. The computer says this shot is a guaranteed hit. He looked up at the target, 1,700 yards of disappointment staring back. So why does that target keep standing? Gunnery Sergeant Daphne Carver lowered her spotting scope. 32 years old, 10 years in the Corps, and the only woman on a team that still wasn't sure women belonged there. Her eyes were red-rimmed from hours of staring through glass, watching bullets betray physics. Because something is wrong with the environment, she said quietly. The wind readings don't match what I'm seeing through the scope. Voss turned on her like a drill instructor who'd heard back talk. The equipment doesn't lie, Gunny. We've got anemometers at every 200 yards. We've got thermal sensors. We've got laser rangefinders accurate to within a centimeter. If the equipment says the conditions are right, then the conditions are right. Daphne met his eyes, held them. Something in her stare said she'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. With respect, Master Sergeant, the equipment is reading what it can measure, not what's actually happening between here and that target. Voss's face went red, blood pressure climbing, control slipping. Are you questioning 21 years of my experience, Gunny? I'm questioning why we're trusting machines over our eyes, Master Sergeant. The silence that followed could have stopped artillery fire. Voss turned away, looked out at the range, at the mountains that had become his enemy, at the career he could feel slipping through his fingers like water through a clenched fist. Behind the safety barriers in the visitor observation area, a 17-year-old kid named Tyler Voss watched his father's world collapse in real time. The boy had driven 6 hours from San Diego to see his dad do what he did best, to see the legendary Master Sergeant Clayton Voss turn young Marines into warriors. Instead, he was watching his father fail. Tyler's phone buzzed, a text from his mother. "How's your dad doing?" Tyler looked at the man on the firing line, saw the tension in his shoulders, the defeat in his stance. He texted back 3 words that felt like betrayal. "Not good, Mom." But Tyler didn't know the half of it. Didn't know about the $15,000 deployment bonus his mother was counting on to save their house. Didn't know about the medical bills from his grandmother's cancer treatment. Didn't know that his father's perfect record was the only thing holding the Voss family together. All he knew was that his hero was losing, and in the Marine Corps, losers didn't get second chances. The woman tending the roses near the target markers had been invisible for 18 months. She preferred it that way. Alexis Kincaid moved through the morning heat with the unhurried pace of someone who had nowhere important to be. Faded khaki work shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. Tactical boots worn down to comfort covered in the red dust of 100 workdays. A name tag that read A. Brennan Grounds Maintenance in block letters that looked official enough to pass any casual inspection. The thermos in her weathered hands cost $40 at REI. The woman holding it had cost the Defense Intelligence Agency $3 million to train. She knelt beside a patch of desert roses, pruning shears in hand, and listened to the sound of failure echo across the valley. Another shot, another miss. Lex didn't look up, didn't need to. She'd been watching this team for 6 weeks, had their patterns memorized, their weaknesses, cataloged their futures. Written in the wind, they couldn't read. The roses didn't need pruning. They were desert plants bred for survival, not beauty. But the roses gave her a reason to be here, within sight of the range, within earshot of the radios, within striking distance of the mission that had brought her to this godforsaken mountain. Operation Ghostwalker. 18 months deep cover. 18 months of yes, sir, and right away, sir, and pretending she couldn't field strip an M4 blindfolded in 14 seconds. 18 months of being looked through, talked over, dismissed as part of the scenery. The Defense Intelligence Agency didn't waste $3 million on ordinary soldiers. They invested that money in weapons. Lex was a weapon, a very expensive, very patient, very deadly weapon that looked like someone's sister who mowed lawns for a living. She stood slowly stretching, like someone whose back hurt from manual labor, and allowed herself a glance at the firing line. 6 Marines, 1 failing team, 36 hours until their world ended. And somewhere on this base, a traitor was selling secrets that would get American soldiers killed. Lex's mission was simple. Wait. Watch. When the traitor made his move, be ready. The cover was perfect. Groundskeepers saw everything, knew everyone had access to every corner of the base without raising suspicion. The mission was going perfectly. Until this morning, when 6 good Marines started dying a slow professional death because they couldn't read the wind. Lex sipped her coffee, tasted yesterday's grounds and today's guilt, watched Gunnery Sergeant Carver argue with Master Sergeant Voss, watched the young corporal stare at his computer like it held the secrets of the universe, watched the visitor area where a teenage boy sat watching his father fail. The mission was clear. Stay invisible. Complete the objective. Let nothing compromise 18 months of work. But Lex's father hadn't raised her to watch warriors drown when she knew how to swim. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Kincaid, Medal of Honor. Killed in action, Helmand Province, Afghanistan, August 2012. His death had been ruled combat casualty. The official report said Taliban sniper, 800 yards, 1 shot, instant death. The classified report Lex had never been supposed to see said something different. Said betrayal. Said friendly fire from an asset gone bad. Said her father had been assassinated by someone he trusted. Said the investigation was ongoing. 12 years later, Lex was still investigating, still hunting, still carrying her father's unfinished rifle and his unfinished war. The rifle waited in her truck. Custom Remington 700 built to her father's specifications, finished by his daughter's hands. The inscription on the stock was worn from 1,000 touches. For Alexis, hit what you aim for. Stand for what you believe. Dad 2011. She'd hit plenty of targets in the 12 years since. Some of them had even deserved it. Another shot cracked across the valley. Another miss. Lex made her decision. She set down her thermos, brushed the dust from her jeans, and started walking toward the firing line. Time to become visible. Master Sergeant Voss saw her coming and felt his blood pressure spike another 10 points. The maintenance worker, the groundskeeper, the woman who'd been wallpaper for the last year and a half, suddenly walking toward his range like she had a purpose. "Corporal Reed," Voss barked, "get that civilian away from the firing line." Houston started moving, but the woman was already at the safety barrier, close enough to be a problem, far enough to be technically within regulations. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice carried across the range without being loud, controlled, confident. "I don't mean to interrupt, but I couldn't help noticing your wind flags are lying to you." Voss stared at her, tried to process what he'd just heard, failed. "Ma'am, this is an active military training range. Civilians need to maintain distance from..." Your wind flags, she continued as if he hadn't spoken, are reading surface layer only. You've got at least 3 distinct wind environments between here and that target. Your ballistic computer can't see them. Silence dropped over the range like a paw. Houston Reed stopped mid-step. Daphne Carver's head snapped around. Every Marine on the line turned to stare at the small woman in the faded workshirt who just used the phrase distinct wind environments, like she knew what it meant. Voss felt something hot and dangerous bloom in his chest. Embarrassment. Rage. The toxic combination of a man who'd been failing all morning being corrected by someone he'd never even noticed existed. He walked toward her, used his size. 6'2", 210 pounds. 21 years of command presence focused on making a 5'4" maintenance worker understand she'd made a mistake. Ma'am, the word came out sharp enough to cut. I've been shooting precision rifles since before you learned to walk. I've qualified expert marksman for 15 consecutive years. I've trained snipers who've served in 3 different wars. I don't need gardening advice from someone who trims hedges for a living. He was 3 feet from her now, close enough to intimidate, close enough to loom, close enough that most people would step back, apologize, walk away. The woman didn't move, didn't blink. Something shifted in her pale green eyes, something cold and ancient and utterly unimpressed by his display. The grass at 1,000 yards is bending toward us, she said quietly. Your flags say the wind is blowing away from us at 15 miles per hour from the northwest. The grass says you're wrong. She pointed downrange. Her arm moved with a precision that was almost mechanical, military. The thermal layer at 900 yards is flowing opposite to your surface wind, creates a rolling current that reverses direction approximately every 40 seconds. Your ballistic computer is calculating it for steady wind conditions that don't exist. Voss opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Who the hell are you? The woman smiled, small, dangerous, someone who knows how to read the mountain you've been fighting all morning. Daphne Carver moved closer to the barrier spotting scope forgotten in her hands. She was staring at the woman with an intensity that made Voss nervous, looking at something he couldn't see. Ma'am, Daphne said slowly, what's your background in precision shooting? Books mostly. The maintenance worker shrugged. I've always been interested in ballistics. It's a fascinating science. Houston Reed had his notebook out now, scribbling. His computer lay forgotten on the bench, abandoned like a lover who'd lied too many times. You're saying we're shooting through multiple wind layers, Houston said, and the computer can only read the surface conditions. Your computer reads what its sensors tell it. The woman looked at him directly, met his eyes. Something in that gaze made Houston straighten unconsciously. But sensors are fixed positions. They can't read atmospheric changes between positions. They can't see thermal inversions. They can't predict the rolling currents created by mountain terrain heating and cooling at different rates. She turned back to Voss. Your equipment is expensive and sophisticated and completely blind to reality. You're trying to force the mountain to obey your data. The mountain doesn't care about your data, Master Sergeant. The words landed like artillery fire. Voss felt his authority crumbling, felt his team's eyes on him, watching, judging, seeing him for what he was in this moment. A man who couldn't admit he was wrong. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from this training exercise and return to your duties. This is your final warning before I contact base security. The woman studied him for a long moment, reading him the way she'd read the wind, seeing through him the way she'd seen through his equipment. Then she did something that would haunt Clayton Voss for the rest of his life. She smiled. Master Sergeant, what if I told you I could hit all 3 targets with 1 shot? The world stopped. Daphne Carver's spotting scope slipped from her fingers, caught by the strap around her neck. Houston Reed's pen froze mid-word. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting to hear what came next. Voss laughed, harsh, bitter, the laugh of a man who'd been pushed too far. Lady, this is a military precision range, not a carnival shooting gallery. We don't perform trick shots here. We execute calculated firing solutions based on verified data and established protocols. Ricochet ballistics. The maintenance worker said it casually, like she was discussing the weather. If you understand the angles and the target materials, one properly placed shot can create a chain reaction. First target at 1,700 yards, second target at 2,000, third target at 2,200 back wall of the valley. She gestured to the range layout with a familiarity that sent ice down Voss's spine. The steel composition of your targets creates predictable deflection angles when struck at specific points. The bullet fragments on primary impact, but retains enough mass and velocity to engage the secondary target. The deflection sends it toward the tertiary position. Basic physics, advanced application. Houston Reed looked up from his notebook. His voice came out strangled. Ma'am, ricochet ballistics is classified military science. That's taught at Special Operations Target Interdiction School. How does a civilian contractor? I read a lot, she interrupted. Daphne moved to the barrier, stared at the woman like she was seeing a ghost. Show us your hands. The maintenance worker raised her hands slowly, palms out, calloused, strong. A white scar ran along her right forearm, 4 inches long, the kind of scar that came from something sharp and violent and survived. Daphne's eyes tracked to the woman's stance, feet shoulder-width apart, weight slightly forward, hands at her sides, relaxed but ready. The posture was unconscious, automatic, drilled into muscle memory by thousands of hours of training. That's parade rest, Daphne whispered. You're standing at parade rest. The maintenance worker glanced down at herself. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, regret. Then it was gone, replaced by that same calm confidence. Old habits, she said. Voss felt the ground shifting beneath him, felt the morning slipping away from mission failure into something stranger, something that terrified him more than losing his deployment. The possibility that this woman was exactly who she appeared not to be. Who are you? He asked again. Quieter this time. Dangerous. Before she could answer, a voice cut across the range from behind them. Gravel. Authority earned through decades, not demanded through rank. I believe the lady asked you a question, Master Sergeant. They all turned. Colonel Raymond Bridger stood at the edge of the firing line, hands clasped behind his back, eyes sharp enough to cut steel. 64 years old, 38 years in the Corps before retiring to a comfortable civilian contractor position that somehow kept bringing him back to active bases. He wore khakis and a polo shirt that couldn't hide what he'd been, what he still was, a warrior. Colonel Bridger. Voss's voice carried respect, confusion, and a thread of hope. Sir, this civilian has been disrupting. I heard what she said, Master Sergeant. Bridger walked closer. His eyes never left the maintenance worker. Something passed between them. Recognition, understanding. A conversation conducted entirely in silence. She said she could hit 3 targets with 1 shot. I suggest you let her try. Voss felt his world tipping sideways. Sir, with respect, you're a retired officer working as a civilian contractor. I appreciate your input, but I'm responsible for range safety and training protocols. I can't just hand live ammunition to a what? Bridger's voice could have a frozen nitrogen. To a woman, as to a maintenance worker, to someone you've decided isn't worth your time. The old colonel stepped closer to Voss, close enough that the younger man could see the combat ribbons that still showed in the faded tan lines around Bridger's neck. Close enough to feel the weight of 4 decades of service pressing down like gravity. I trained snipers when you were in diapers, Master Sergeant. Some of the finest warriors to ever carry a rifle learned from me. And right now I'm telling you to let this woman demonstrate. Because maybe, just maybe, you'll learn something that 30 years of service hasn't taught you yet. Bridger turned to the maintenance worker. Ma'am, you mentioned having your own rifle. She nodded once. In my truck, sir. Then I suggest you retrieve it. The Master Sergeant and his team could use a lesson in humility. The woman looked at Voss, held his eyes, and in that moment, Clayton Voss saw something that made his blood run cold. He saw himself being measured, weighed, found wanting. I'll be right back, she said quietly. Then she turned and walked toward the parking area, moving with a fluidity that didn't match her plain clothes and dirty boots. Moving like someone who knew exactly how dangerous she was. Daphne grabbed Houston's binoculars, tracked the woman across the open ground. Master Sergeant, she said softly, you need to see this. Voss took the binoculars, followed Daphne's pointing finger. The maintenance truck was standard government issue. white, dusty, unremarkable. The gun case the woman was lifting from the cargo bed was anything but standard. It was black carbon fiber, military-grade transportation equipment. The kind of case that cost $4,000 and required classified authorization to purchase. The kind of case that said whoever owned it valued their weapon more than most people valued their cars. The woman laid the case on the truck's tailgate. Her movements were practiced, professional, reverent. Houston Reed lowered his useless computer. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "Who the hell is she?" Colonel Bridger watched the parking area. A ghost of a smile touched his weathered face. "Someone who's been invisible for 18 months, he said quietly. "Someone who's about to teach you the most important lesson of your career." He turned to Voss. The smile disappeared. "And someone who's about to end yours, Master Sergeant, because you just made the mistake of disrespecting a federal agent in the middle of a classified operation." The words hit like a grenade. "Sir, what?" "Her name," Bridger said softly, watching the woman walk back toward them, carrying a rifle case that probably cost more than Voss made in 3 months, "is Sergeant Alexis Kincaid, Defense Intelligence Agency. And you just blew 18 months of deep cover by being exactly the kind of Marine the Corps doesn't need anymore." In the visitor area, Tyler Voss watched his father's face go pale. Watched the legendary Master Sergeant Clayton Voss realize he'd just made the worst mistake of his military career. And in the parking area, Alexis Kincaid set down her father's rifle case and felt the weight of 12 years of hunting settle across her shoulders. The mission was blown. But before it ended, she was going to teach these Marines something her father had taught her. Sometimes the most impossible shot is the one nobody sees coming. Colonel Marcus Talbot had the kind of face that remembered every war since Desert Storm. 58 years old, 32 years in the Marine Corps, with 3 combat deployments, in a chest full of ribbons that told stories he'd never discuss at dinner parties. Right now, that face showed something Master Sergeant Clayton Voss had never seen before. Fury mixed with respect. Anger tempered by understanding. The expression of a commander forced to destroy something valuable because regulations demanded it. Talbot's boots kicked up dust as he crossed from the helicopter to the firing line. Behind him, 2 federal agents moved with the predatory grace of men who'd spent careers in places where mistakes got you killed. Their suits were off-the-rack government issue, but the bulges under their jackets were custom Glock 19s carried in shoulder holsters designed for fast access. The taller agent pulled credentials from his jacket, flipped them open with practiced efficiency. "Special Agent Morrison, DIA. This is Special Agent Webb. As of 0930 hours, this entire range is now under federal jurisdiction. What happens here stays here. Anyone discussing today's events without proper clearance will face charges under the Espionage Act." That clear, 6 Marines and 1 range safety officer nodded like school children caught smoking. Morrison's eyes found Lex, softened fractionally, the way you'd look at a soldier who'd just taken a bullet for her unit. "Sergeant Kincaid, good to see you're still breathing. We were worried when the cover went active." Lex secured the final latch on her rifle case. Her voice came out flat, professional, empty of the emotion churning beneath. "The cover was viable until approximately 0815, when I made the tactical decision to intervene in a training failure. Operational security was secondary to mission effectiveness." "Mission effectiveness?" Morrison's tone said he'd heard that excuse before and never believed it. "You spent 18 months establishing deep cover, $3 million of training and preparation, all of it compromised because you couldn't watch Marines miss targets." "I couldn't watch good warriors fail when I knew how to save them, sir." The silence that followed carried weight. Talbot moved past Morrison, stopped 3 feet from Lex, studied her with the intensity of someone reading after-action reports written in blood. "Sergeant Kincaid, Master Sergeant Voss and his team. Time for everyone to understand exactly what's been happening on my base for the last 18 months." He turned to face the Marines. His voice carried the authority of 3 decades. "Gentleman Gunnery Sergeant Carver, allow me to formally introduce Special Agent Alexis Kincaid, currently assigned to Operation Ghostwalker, a long-term counterintelligence operation that's been running since February of last year." Houston Reed's hands shook as he retrieved his fallen notebook. "Sir, counterintelligence, you mean?" "I mean there's been a security breach on this base for the last 14 months. Someone with access to classified material has been selling intelligence to hostile foreign agencies. Someone trusted. Someone we never suspected until bodies started showing up in places they shouldn't be. Talbot's jaw tightened. The words came harder now. 3 operations compromised. 4 American assets killed in the field. Millions of dollars in intelligence gathering burned because someone valued money over the lives of brothers and sisters in arms. Daphne Carver felt ice slide down her spine. Sir who, Agent Webb spoke for the first time. His voice was Southern-educated, dangerous. Gunnery Sergeant Victor Dalton, logistics officer, 22 years in the Corps, access to supply manifests, training schedules, deployment timelines. Perfect position to observe, collect, and transmit information that our enemies would pay it extremely well to acquire. The name landed like a mortar round. Victor Dalton, the friendly supply NCO who processed everyone's requisitions, who knew every training schedule, who had coffee with junior Marines and made sure everyone got their gear on time, who'd been at the base longer than most of the current command staff. Voss felt his stomach drop. Sir, I've known Gunny Dalton for 6 years. He's been selling classified information to Russian GRU operatives for 14 months, Morrison interrupted coldly. We have photographs, encrypted communications, bank transfers to accounts in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. And as of 0900 hours this morning, we have him in custody at the base security facility. Morrison pulled a tablet from his jacket, swiped through images that made professional warriors sick. Dalton meeting with a man in civilian clothes at a restaurant in Las Vegas. Dalton photographing documents in a supply office after hours. Dalton transferring files to an encrypted thumb drive while his computer screen displayed classified deployment schedules. The final image showed Dalton this morning less than an hour ago photographing the range with a telephoto lens from the logistics building third-floor window. Photographing Lex as she demonstrated the impossible shot, transmitting proof that a federal agent's cover had been blown. Dalton was the final piece, Webb continued. We knew there was a leak. We knew it originated from someone with access to training operations. We spent 18 months narrowing the field. Sergeant Kincaid's cover as grounds maintenance gave her access to every area of the base without raising suspicion. Eyes and ears where no one would notice or question. She identified 7 suspects through observation and access pattern analysis. We eliminated 6 through investigation. Dalton was the last. Lex spoke quietly, her voice carrying the weight of decisions that had cost everything. This morning's demonstration was intentional exposure. Foreign intelligence services have been hunting me since a Budapest operation in 2022. Russian and Chinese operatives have partial identification. Photographs, voice recordings, incomplete but dangerous. When I revealed my capabilities publicly, I knew Dalton would photograph and transmit immediately. His operational protocol required real-time reporting of any unexpected tactical demonstration or security anomaly. She looked at Morrison. He transmitted 11 minutes after your shot, encrypted file to a known GRU handler operating out of San Francisco. We intercepted it 17 seconds after transmission. Dalton was arrested while attempting to wipe his phone. He's facing 30 years federal prison for espionage. More if we can prove the 4 deaths tied directly to his intelligence sales. Morrison's expression hardened. You sacrificed 18 months of deep cover to force his hand. Exposed yourself to hostile foreign intelligence. Put your life at significant risk. That's either the bravest operational decision I've seen or the most reckless. It was necessary, sir. This team needed help immediately. The mission could wait another hour. They couldn't wait another day. Talbot stepped forward. His voice dropped to something dangerous and final. Master Sergeant Voss, you need to understand what just happened here. Special Agent Kincaid compromised a federal counterintelligence operation, exposed herself to hostile foreign agencies that have standing termination orders against her, put her life at significant risk, all because your team couldn't figure out basic wind reading and you were too proud to accept help from someone you assumed was beneath your notice. The words hit like precision artillery. Voss opened his mouth, closed it. Nothing he could say would matter. Nothing would undo the morning's destruction. Talbot wasn't finished. Your conduct this morning represents the most egregious breach of professional protocol and human decency I've witnessed in 32 years of service. You didn't just disrespect a civilian contractor. You endangered a federal agent conducting classified operations vital to national security. You demonstrated prejudice, arrogance, and a fundamental failure of leadership that has no place in the modern Marine Corps. Talbot moved closer, close enough that Voss could smell coffee and Furies and the end of everything he'd built. You are hereby relieved of command effective immediately. You will be transferred to logistics support duty, administrative capacity, only pending full investigation. No field operations, no training responsibilities, no deployment authorization, no contact with operational Marines. A formal Article 32 hearing will determine whether additional charges under the Uniform Code of Military Justice are warranted for conduct unbecoming and dereliction of duty. The words fell like an execution sentence. Voss felt his knees weaken, felt 30 years of careful career planning evaporate like water in the desert sun, felt his son watching from the visitor area, witnessing his father's destruction broadcast in real time. Sir, I didn't know who she was. I couldn't have. You didn't need to know who she was. Talbot's voice could have cut through armor plating. You needed to show basic human respect to every person on this base, regardless of their rank, position, or perceived status. You failed that fundamental test. You failed your Marines. You failed the Corps. You failed yourself. Talbot turned to the rest of the team. Gunnery Sergeant Carver, Corporal Reed, and the remaining team members will undergo mandatory retraining on interaction protocols with all base personnel. Your deployment to Syria is delayed 2 weeks pending team restructuring and assignment of a new commanding officer. Use that time to master the techniques Sergeant Kincaid demonstrated this morning. Your lives may depend on it. Daphne felt her deployment bonus slipping away, felt the mortgage payment she'd counted on becoming uncertain. But she couldn't bring herself to protest, not after watching what Voss had done, what his arrogance had cost everyone involved. In the visitor area, 17-year-old Tyler Voss stood with his phone clutched in white-knuckled hands. The device buzzed with his mother's text asking how things were going. He stared at his father, the legendary master sergeant who'd never failed at anything, now reduced to a man who'd destroyed his career through sheer arrogance. Tyler's fingers moved slowly across the screen. Each word felt like betrayal and truth mixed together in equal measure. Dad just lost everything, Mom. His command, his deployment, maybe his career, because he couldn't show respect to someone he thought was just a janitor. I'll explain when I get home. He pressed send, looked at his father one more time, saw something crumbling that could never be rebuilt, something broken that no apology could fix. The teenager made a decision in that moment, a decision that would define the next 4 years of his life. He wouldn't be like his father, wouldn't let rank and ego blind him to the value of every person he met, wouldn't mistake authority for wisdom or position for character. He'd be better. Lex watched Voss's collapse with something between pity and grim satisfaction. She'd seen this movie before in a dozen different countries, seen good Marines destroyed by pride, seen careers end because someone forgot that respect was earned through character, not demanded through rank. Her father had taught her that. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Kincaid, who treated every Marine from private to general with the same fundamental dignity, who'd believed that honor was a choice you made every day in every interaction with every person, who died because someone he trusted had sold that honor for $200,000. Lex picked up her rifle case. The weight felt heavier now. 12 years of carrying her father's legacy, 12 years of hunting, 12 years of wearing grief-like body armor that never quite fit right. Colonel Talbot, sir, request permission to provide technical instruction to Whiskey Range Team before extraction. They need to understand what I taught them this morning. Need documentation they can reference during deployment. Talbot looked at Morrison. A silent conversation conducted entirely in expressions that spoke of regulations, security protocols, and the cold calculus of operational necessity balanced against humanitarian concern. Morrison nodded once. 30 minutes. Nothing classified beyond what they have already witnessed. Basic environmental reading only. Then we extract you to Andrews Air Force Base for full debrief and operational reassignment. Understood, sir. Thank you. Lex turned to the 6 Marines who represented everything she'd been fighting for. Warriors who deserved better than equipment failures and leadership that valued ego over effectiveness. She walked to the shooting bench, pulled a worn notepad from her work shirt pocket. The paper was covered in sketches and calculations she'd been making for 6 weeks watching this team fail, planning the lesson they'd eventually need. Gather close, she said quietly. What I'm about to teach you will save your lives in places where technology fails and instinct is all you have left. Pay attention. They moved like she was conducting a sacred ceremony. Reverent, desperate, ready to learn from someone who'd just proven that mastery existed beyond their expensive equipment. Lex drew quickly, wind layers flowing like invisible rivers, thermal patterns cycling with predictable chaos, environmental indicators that computers couldn't measure and sensors couldn't predict. Her hand moved with the practiced confidence of someone who'd taught this lesson in a dozen different countries, training warriors who'd use these skills in places that would never appear on official maps. Wind reading isn't about equipment, she said, her voice carrying the weight of her father's teaching. It's about understanding that air moves in 3 dimensions, like a river with currents at different depths. Your ballistic computer measures surface conditions, but bullets fly through the entire water column from surface to target. She pointed to different parts of the diagram with a precision that made Houston's note-taking look amateur. Surface wind. Read it with flags and vegetation movement at close range. Watch grass stems, not just fabric flags. Grass responds to lighter currents that flags miss. Mid-level currents. Read them with grass movement and dust drift at medium distances. Different vegetation heights show different wind layers. High-altitude flow. Read it with cloud movement and ridgetop indicators. Look for consistent patterns, not momentary gusts. Houston scribbled frantically, trying to capture in words and diagrams what Lex was teaching through pictures and hard-won experience, trying to translate mastery into something teachable. Thermal patterns are the key most shooters miss. Rock formations heat unevenly throughout the day. Dark surfaces absorb solar radiation faster than light surfaces, creates rising air columns that push crossways to prevailing wind. The cycle is predictable if you watch long enough. Time your shot to the convergence window when all layers briefly align. That's your opportunity. That's when impossible becomes merely difficult. She drew the 40-second thermal cycle that had defeated them all morning. Made it look simple now. Made it look obvious. Made them wonder how they'd missed it. Daphne studied the diagram like it held the secrets of the universe. Maybe it did. Ma'am, how long does it take to learn this, to really see what you see? Lex looked at her, saw a warrior, saw a mother trying to provide for her daughter, saw someone who'd never been given a real chance to prove she belonged in the conversation. My father taught me wind reading when I was 12 years old. We spent every weekend at ranges across California, shooting in valleys, on ridges, in desert heat and mountain cold. I've been practicing for 15 years. You don't have 15 years, but you've got 2 weeks before Syria deployment. Practice every single day. Trust your eyes over your equipment. Learn to see the invisible currents. They're always there, always flowing, always waiting for someone patient enough to read them. She turned to Houston. Your computers are magnificent tools. They calculate faster than any human brain. They never get tired, never lose focus, never doubt their math. But they only know what their sensors tell them. And sensors are fixed positions. They can't read atmospheric changes between measurement points. They can't see thermal inversions. They can't predict the rolling currents created by terrain that heats and cools at different rates throughout the day. Houston looked up from his notes. His voice came out younger than his years, vulnerable, in a way that military bearing usually masked. Ma'am, you said your father taught you this, that he built your rifle, that he died before finishing it. How did you learn to complete something that advanced? Lex's expression hardened slightly. The question touched something deep. I finished what he started because I made him a promise. Because when you lose someone you love, you don't let their work die with them. You carry it forward. You complete the mission they couldn't finish. You honor their memory by becoming who they believed you could be. She paused. The next words came harder, dragged up from a place she rarely visited. My father was Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Kincaid, Medal of Honor recipient, killed in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, August 2012. Official reports said Taliban sniper, 800 yards through the scope, quick death, heroic sacrifice protecting his unit during a firefight. The Marines listened like she was reading from a book of martyrs. The classified report I wasn't supposed to see said something different. Said assassination from inside the wire. Said targeting laser painting him for a shot that should never have been possible from the enemy's position. Said there was a traitor in his unit. Someone he'd trusted with his life. Someone who sold American lives for money that couldn't buy back 1 second of integrity. Lex's hand trembled once. Just once. Then the discipline of 12 years locked it down. I've spent 12 years finishing his rifle, building it piece by piece with money I earned and skills I learned and a determination that scared everyone who tried to help me. 12 years hunting the man who killed him. 12 years learning to be the weapon federal intelligence needed. And this morning I compromised all of that because I couldn't watch good Marines fail when I knew how to save them. Colonel Bridger, who'd been silent throughout the briefing, stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades and memories that wouldn't die. Your father was the finest Marine I ever had the privilege to train. This was back in 2003 and 2004 advanced marksmanship courses before the second Iraq deployment surge. Garrett came to my program already an expert marksman, left it a true master. We stayed in touch over the years. He'd call sometimes asking advice about rifle builds or ballistic calculations, talked about teaching his daughter to shoot, said she had the patience and the eye, said she'd be better than him someday if she kept working. Bridger's eyes held memories of another lifetime, another war, another Kincaid who'd made impossible shots look routine. When federal intelligence approached me 18 months ago about providing oversight for Operation Ghostwalker, they showed me the primary agent's file. When I saw your name, Alexis, I knew immediately, saw your qualification scores and understood. Garrett taught you everything he knew. Then you took it further than he ever did. He looked at the gathered Marines. I was at Lieutenant Colonel Kincaid's funeral. Arlington National Cemetery, August 2012. Full honors, 3 volleys, taps playing across more graves than anyone should have to see in one lifetime. Watched a 15-year-old girl stand next to her mother and accept a folded flag with hands that didn't shake because she wouldn't let herself break in front of all those uniforms. Bridger's voice cracked slightly. I wanted to tell you then, Alexis, that I'd trained your father, that he'd been extraordinary, that his loss was something the Corps would feel for generations. But you were a child grieving your father. I was a stranger with no right to intrude on that grief. So I stayed silent, watched you walk away from that grave carrying more weight than any child should ever bear. He stepped closer to Lex. Your father would be proud of who you've become, proud of how you finished his work, proud that you chose to help these Marines even when it cost you a mission you'd spent 18 months building. That's exactly what Garrett would have done. Put warriors before operations. Put lives before career. That's what made him extraordinary. That's what makes you his daughter in every way that matters. Lex felt tears threatening, pushed them back through discipline and 12 years of practice at not breaking in public. But her voice came out rougher than intended. Thank you, sir. That means more than you know. Agent Morrison checked his watch, the gesture that said time was running and missions waited for no one's emotional moments. Sergeant Kincaid, we need to move. Extraction window is closing. Foreign intelligence services will be analyzing Dalton's transmission within hours. We need you secure at Andrews before they can triangulate your current position. But Webb stepped forward first, pulled a tablet from his jacket. His expression showed something like regret mixed with grim satisfaction. Before you go, Sergeant, you need to understand the full scope of what we found when we arrested Dalton. The investigation opened doors we didn't know existed. He swiped through screens, brought up a file that made Lex's blood turn to ice water. The photograph showed a man in his 50s, graying hair that had once been dark, athletic build despite the years, eyes that carried the kind of intelligence that made him dangerous even in a still photograph. Former Major Marcus Brennan, her father's teammate, his operations officer, his friend, someone Garrett Kincaid had trusted with his life for 4 years of deployments. The traitor who'd sold him to the enemy for money. Dalton wasn't working alone, Webb said quietly, his southern accent making the terrible words almost gentle. He was part of a network, small but sophisticated, run by Marcus Brennan, former DIA operations officer. Went rogue 8 years ago after a failed investigation tried to link him to intelligence leaks. Has been selling classified information to the highest bidder ever since. Russians, Chinese, North Koreans, whoever pays best for American secrets. Lex's hands clenched into fists so tight her knuckles went white. Brennan was your father's operations officer in Afghanistan from 2009 to 2012. They served together for 4 years across multiple deployments. Brennan knew every mission, every asset, every operational weakness. When he turned, he took all of that knowledge with him, sold it piece by piece to enemies who used it to kill the Americans he'd once protected. Webb pulled up another file. This one marked classified in red letters that screamed danger and secrets. Your father's death in August 2012 wasn't a combat casualty. We've known this at the classified level for years but couldn't prove it. The targeting laser that painted Lieutenant Colonel Kincaid came from inside the wire, from someone with access to his schedule and position, someone who knew exactly where he'd be during that operation and when he'd be most vulnerable. The words Lex had suspected for 12 years, now confirmed, now proven, now undeniable. Brennan sold your father to the Taliban for $200,000, provided exact coordinates, timing, and tactical information, painted him with a ground-based laser designator that made the shot possible from 800 yards through heavy cover, then filed the after-action report that ruled it combat death, collected his payment, disappeared from federal service 6 months later before the investigation could gather enough evidence for charges. Lex felt the world narrow to a point, to a face in a photograph, to a name that had haunted 12 years of nightmares. Her voice came out flat, cold, empty of everything except purpose. Where is he? Prague, Czech Republic, operating under the identity of an international security consultant, meeting with Russian intelligence contacts. We've had him under surveillance for 3 months, waiting for the right moment to move, gathering evidence on his current network before we shut it down. Morrison stepped forward. His voice carried operational authority and something that might have been understanding. Your next assignment, if you choose to accept it. Deep cover in Prague. Art history professor conducting research. Make contact with Brennan through his social circles. Determine the full scope of his network and current operations. Then terminate the threat with extreme prejudice. The words hung in the desert air like heat shimmer. Terminate the threat. 12 years of hunting. 12 years of promises made to a grave at Arlington. 12 years of carrying her father's rifle in his unfinished war. Now ending in Prague, with justice or vengeance. Lex wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. Wasn't sure she cared. I accept, sir. When do I leave, Borisov? 24 hours. Full briefing packet will be provided during flight to Andrews. Mission timeline is 4 to 6 weeks. Rules of engagement are at your discretion, given Brennan's extreme threat level and history of evading capture. Morrison's expression showed something almost like sympathy. This is personal for you, Sergeant. We know that. The mission doesn't get more personal than hunting the man who killed your father. If you need to decline, if you need to pass this to another operator, no one would question that decision. Lex looked at him, held his eyes, let him see exactly how personal this was. Sir, I've been preparing for this mission for 12 years. I'm not declining. I'm not passing it to anyone else. This is mine. He killed my father. He sold American lives for money. He's been running free for 8 years while better men died in his place. That ends in Prague. I end it. That's not negotiable. Morrison nodded slowly. Understood, Sergeant. Good hunting. Lex turned back to the Marines one final time. These warriors who'd learned more in 3 hours than most people learned in careers, who'd seen their commander destroyed and their world rebuilt, who'd carry forward the lessons learned from a woman who'd sacrificed everything to teach them. Listen to what I taught you today. Practice it until it becomes instinct. Trust your eyes over your equipment. Respect every person you meet, regardless of rank or position or what you assume about them. And remember that sometimes the most important shot isn't the one you take. It's the one you teach someone else to make. She picked up her rifle case, her father's legacy, her burden, her weapon. The helicopter's engines were already spinning up. Time to leave. Time to disappear back into the shadows where legends lived. Colonel Bridger walked with her toward the aircraft. Private moment. Final words between two people who understood loss and duty and the weight of promises that outlasted the people who made them. Your father used to say that the greatest warriors are those who know when to fight and when to teach. You honored that principle today, Alexis, at tremendous cost. The cost was worth it, sir. Those Marines will survive their deployment because of what they learned here. That's what Dad would have wanted. That's what he taught me. Mission second, warriors first. And Brennan, what does your father want with him? Lex looked at the old colonel, saw understanding, saw someone who'd lost friends to betrayal, who knew the weight of hunting ghosts through classified shadows. My father wants justice, sir. After 12 years, I'm finally in position to give it to him. The Black Hawk lifted off 3 minutes later. Lex watched through the open door as Whiskey Range fell away below. Watched 6 Marines standing in the dust, holding diagrams and notes and knowledge that would save their lives. Watched Colonel Bridger standing alone, watching the helicopter disappear, like he'd watched another Kincaid leave for another mission that hadn't brought them home. Master Sergeant Clayton Voss stood apart from his former team, alone in the way that only disgraced leaders can be alone, watching his career disappear into the sky alongside the woman who'd destroyed it by being everything he'd failed to be. Respect, competence, character, the things that mattered when rank and ego stripped away. 5 weeks and 3 days later, deceased. Mountains of northern Syria proved that some lessons last forever. The enemy sniper had been operating for 3 days. 7 confirmed kills, an all-American, and all precise shots from a position that the most sophisticated technology in the military arsenal couldn't locate. Thermal imaging found nothing but rocks and shadows. Surveillance drones drew accurate fire before they could get close enough for useful imagery. Satellite reconnaissance showed empty terrain that looked like 1,000 other Syrian mountainsides. The convoy was scheduled to roll at dawn. 14 Marines, supply run to a forward operating base that couldn't be delayed without operational consequences. Intelligence reports said the enemy sniper would be waiting, watching, calculating, ready to add more American deaths to his count. The new team commander, a Captain Richards, who'd been pulled from another unit after Voss's relief, gathered his Marines in the pre-dawn darkness. His face showed the kind of tension that came from knowing people would die if he made the wrong call. "Carver," he said quietly, "you're our best chance. The sniper's somewhere in that ridgeline. Technology can't find him. But maybe you can." Gunnery Sergeant Daphne Carver, promoted after Voss's removal and now leading the team's Overwatch element, studied the terrain through her spotting scope. Richards had given her tactical discretion. Trust earned through competence during the 2-week retraining period. Respect granted because she'd proven herself capable, not because regulations demanded it. She ignored the ballistic computer sitting beside her, ignored the thermal imaging scanner, ignored the laser rangefinder and every other piece of expensive equipment that had failed them at Whiskey Range and was failing them now in Syria. Instead, she watched grass movement at 1,100 meters. Different grass than Nevada desert scrub, but same principles, same physics, same invisible currents flowing through 3-dimensional space. She watched thermal shimmer at 900 meters, where rocky outcroppings absorb solar radiation from the rising sun. Watched dust drift that marked crosswind flowing opposite to what the ground-level sensors measured. Watched mirage patterns that pulsed with rhythms only visible to someone who'd learned to see them. She remembered a woman kneeling beside roses at a Nevada firing range, teaching environmental reading in a voice that carried authority earned through blood and loss and 12 years of hunting. Explaining that mountains breathe in patterns technology can't measure. Showing that the invisible becomes visible if you're patient enough to watch. Daphne waited, timed the thermal cycle, watched the convergence pattern that Sergeant Kincaid had described. 43 seconds in Syrian mountains, almost identical to Nevada despite being half a world away, because physics didn't change. Environment didn't care about geography. The principles remained constant even when everything else transformed. The wind aligned, the mirage settled, the thermal inversion completed its cycle. The invisible became visible for exactly 3 seconds. A slight shimmer, a fractional heat distortion, a tiny atmospheric inconsistency at 1,900 meters that revealed what satellites and drones and thermal imaging couldn't detect. Human breath, weapon heat signature. A sniper who'd been invisible for 3 days because he understood concealment but hadn't accounted for someone who could read the mountain itself. Daphne made minute adjustments, trusted her eyes over the computer, calculated bullet drop and wind drift through observation and instinct instead of algorithms and sensors. She fired. 1,950 meters. The bullet flew through four distinct atmospheric layers: surface wind, mid-level cross-current, thermal inversion, high-altitude flow. Each one deflecting the trajectory by fractions of an inch that added up to feet at that range. But Daphne had read them all, had calculated for conditions that existed instead of conditions the computer predicted. The enemy's sniper never knew death was coming, never felt the impact that ended his 3-day reign of terror, never understood that his concealment had been perfect against technology, but meaningless against a warrior who'd learned to see what machines couldn't measure. The convoy rolled through safely. 14 Americans returned to their families because a woman named Carver had learned to read mountains from a legend who'd worn a groundskeeper's uniform. The after-action report credited enhanced environmental awareness protocols developed during recent training evolution. Marine intelligence officers read it and wanted details. Combat commanders read it and wanted their snipers trained in the same techniques. The Marines themselves called it something simpler: the Kincaid Protocol. 3 days later, Corporal Houston Reed made an impossible shot of his own. High-value target meeting with insurgent leaders in a compound that should have been unreachable. 2,100 meters. Perfect environmental reading. Technology confirming what his eyes calculated instead of replacing what his brain understood. His report cited Kincaid Protocol as mission critical to successful engagement. Mentioned a diagram drawn on worn paper by a federal agent who'd sacrificed her mission to teach warriors how to survive. The legend spread through Marine Corps sniper schools like wildfire. Stories of a woman who'd been invisible for 18 months, who'd made an impossible 3-target shot, who'd taught environmental reading that saved lives in places where technology failed, and instinct was all that stood between warriors and body bags. They didn't know her full story, didn't know about Prague or Budapest or 12 years hunting a traitor. Didn't know about a father's rifle or a daughter's promise or the weight of carrying legacies through classified shadows. They just knew the lessons worked. The techniques saved lives. The Kincaid Protocol was real. And that was enough. Back at a logistics base in Nevada, former Master Sergeant Clayton Voss processed supply requisitions in an office that smelled like failure and regret. His desk held no photographs. His walls displayed no ribbons. The uniform he wore carried no rank insignia beyond the sergeant stripes he had been administratively reduced to pending the Article 32 hearing that would determine his military future. The letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon, civilian mail, his son's handwriting on the envelope. Voss stared at it for 10 minutes before opening it, afraid of what it would say, more afraid of what it wouldn't say. Dad, I graduate Marine Corps boot camp in 2 weeks. Honor graduate. Top of my class in marksmanship. They're sending me to School of Infantry, then recommending me for scout sniper screening. I'm 19 now, old enough to make my own choices, old enough to understand that the choices you made that morning at Whiskey Range showed me exactly the kind of Marine I don't want to be. You taught me growing up that respect was something you demanded through rank. That authority came from position, that people below you existed to follow orders and stay in their lane. Sergeant Kincaid taught me something different in 3 hours. She taught me that respect is earned through character. That authority comes from competence. That every person deserves dignity, regardless of their position or what you assume about them. I don't want to be like you or Dad. I want to be like her. Someone who earns respect instead of demanding it. Someone who helps instead of hurts. Someone who understands that honor comes from who you are, not what rank you wear. The Marines are teaching me the Kincaid Protocol. Environmental reading, wind analysis, everything she showed your team that morning. They say it's saving lives in Syria. That Marines are coming home because of techniques she taught. I'm going to master those techniques, going to be the kind of sniper who sees what others miss, the kind of warrior who serves with honor instead of ego. I hope someday you'll understand why that matters. Your son, Tyler Voss, read the letter 17 times. Each reading hurt worse than the last. Each word felt like a mirror held up to show him exactly what he'd become. A cautionary tale, a lesson in what not to be. A father whose son was ashamed to follow in his footsteps. He folded the letter carefully, placed it in his desk drawer next to the official Article 32 hearing notice that would determine whether he'd serve his remaining time in the Corps or be discharged under other than honorable conditions. Either way, his son was right. He'd been the wrong kind of Marine, had valued ego over excellence, had demanded respect he hadn't earned, and lost everything because of it. The only question left was whether he could learn from that failure or let it define the rest of his life. 1 year later, Quantico Marine Base in Virginia hosted a ceremony that brought together warriors from across the Corps. The establishment of the first annual Garrett Kincaid Memorial Trophy awarded to the top graduate of the Scout Sniper School. The highest honor in precision marksmanship, the recognition that meant something beyond ribbons and rank. Colonel Raymond Bridger stood at the podium, 73 years old now, officially retired for real this time, but he'd delayed his fishing plans and grandchild visits to attend this moment, to see the legacy continue, to honor a friend who'd died 12 years ago and a daughter who'd carried his memory forward through classified shadows. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Kincaid believed that excellence has no gender. Bridger said, his voice carrying across the assembled Marines with the authority of 40 years in uniform. That honor recognizes only skill and sacrifice, that the greatest warriors are those who teach others to be warriors, that the measure of a Marine isn't what they accomplish themselves, but what they enable others to accomplish. He held up the trophy, simple design, bronze rifle crossed with a spotter's scope, inscription that read, "For excellence in the art and science of precision marksmanship." Today, we honor Lieutenant Colonel Kincaid's memory by celebrating those who embody his ideals, who serve with skill and humility, who understand that mastery comes from dedication, not arrogance, who know that respect is earned through character and proven through action. The top graduate stepped forward. A young woman from rural Montana who'd shot her first rifle at age 8 and never stopped improving, who'd scored perfect on every environmental reading test, who'd made shots that instructors said shouldn't be possible until they saw her do them, who represented everything Garrett Kincaid had believed about who could be a warrior. She accepted the trophy with hands that didn't shake, with eyes that held determination and understanding, and the knowledge that this wasn't just an award, it was a responsibility. Captain Alexis Kincaid stood at the back of the ceremony hall, dressed blues perfect, ribbons earned in places she couldn't discuss, decorating her chest in rows that told classified stories. Captain's bars that came with her permanent assignment as Scout Sniper School Chief Instructor. 500 Marines trained in the Kincaid Protocol over the last year. Dozens of successful missions attributing survival to environmental reading techniques. 0 failures among graduates who'd learned to blend old wisdom with new technology. Statistics that looked good in reports but meant something deeper to Lex. 500 warriors going home to their families. 50 missions that succeeded because someone taught them to see what technology couldn't measure. Countless lives saved because she'd blown her cover at Whiskey Range to help 6 Marines who'd been drowning in their own equipment. Her father would have been proud of those numbers, would have understood that the mission wasn't the shot you made. It was the warriors you trained to make their own shots. After the ceremony, after the photographs and congratulations and formal military rituals, Lex drove alone to Arlington National Cemetery. The route was automatic now. 12 years of pilgrimages to a grave that held the man who'd taught her everything that mattered. Section 60, Row 8, Marker 127. The stone was simple gray granite, standard military issue. Nothing that suggested the man buried beneath had been extraordinary, except for the Medal of Honor citation engraved below his name and rank. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Kincaid, Medal of Honor, August 2012, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Lex knelt beside the headstone, placed a folded certificate next to the fresh flowers that someone else had left. Probably her mother, who still made the drive from California twice a year to visit a husband 12 years gone. The certificate was simple. Classified mission completion report. Sanitized for burial at a national cemetery. No operational details. No classified methods. Just the essential truth. Mission complete. Target neutralized. Threat eliminated. She didn't need to explain more. Her father would understand. "Mission complete, Dad," she said quietly, tracing the engraved letters of his name with fingers that had pulled triggers in a dozen countries. Prague, 3 weeks ago. Brennan's dead. The investigation is closed. Justice served after 12 years. She paused. The memories were still fresh, still sharp enough to cut. 3 weeks ago, Prague had been cold in the way that European cities get cold in November. The kind of cold that settles into bones and doesn't leave until spring. Marcus Brennan had been drinking coffee at a cafe near Charles Bridge. 62 years old, gray hair where it had once been dark. Still fit despite the years of betrayal and blood money. Still alive when better men had died because of his treason. Lex had watched him through a scope from 800 meters. The same distance her father had been killed. The symmetry felt appropriate. Poetic in a way that satisfied something deep and old and hungry for balance. She'd waited 47 minutes for the wind to align, for the thermal patterns to converge, for the moment when justice and ballistics intersected with the precision her father had taught her to value above everything else. The shot had been clean, through the scope, same way her father had died, same precision, same certainty, different outcome this time. Brennan never saw it coming, never felt the impact that ended 12 years of running, never understood that his betrayal had created the weapon that finally found him. The official report listed it as a heart attack. Tragic but natural for a man his age with his stress levels. The DIA closed the file on Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Kincaid's death investigation. After 12 years of hunting through classified channels and shadowed evidence, the case was resolved. But Lex knew the truth, knew that sometimes justice looked like assassination, and sometimes that was exactly what the world needed. I finished your rifle, Dad. Finished your mission. Taught your lessons to a new generation. 500 Marines trained this year. The Kincaid Protocol is doctrine now. Scout Sniper School teaches environmental reading alongside computer-assisted targeting. Your methods are saving lives in places I can't name. She touched the cold marble, felt the engraving beneath her fingers, felt the weight of 12 years starting to lift. I miss you every day, but I kept my promise. Did what you would have wanted, became who you believed I could be. The hunting's over now, time to focus on the teaching, on building the legacy that matters more than any mission. A single tear escaped, just one. 12 years of carrying weight she'd never allowed herself to set down. 12 years of being the weapon federal intelligence needed. 12 years of hunting and hiding and carrying her father's war forward. Now finished, now complete, now able to rest. She stood slowly, straightened her uniform. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Arlington's endless rows of white stones. Each one a story, each one a sacrifice, each one a promise that the living would carry forward what the dead had started. Alexis Kincaid walked back to her car. No urgent missions waiting, no emergency extractions, no classified targets requiring immediate attention. For the first time in 12 years, the war was over. The hunting complete, the promises fulfilled. Tomorrow she'd return to Quantico, to the classroom where young Marines learned to be snipers, to the range where her father's lessons would live through every warrior she trained, to the legacy that mattered more than revenge or justice or any individual mission. The Defense Intelligence Agency would call again eventually. They always did. Warriors like her didn't truly retire. They just found new battles to fight, new threats to eliminate, new missions that required skills most people would never possess. But that could wait. Tonight she could rest. Tonight the war was won. Tonight her father's killer was dead, and his legacy was alive, and the balance sheet finally showed more saved than lost. She drove away from Arlington as the sun set behind the cemetery's endless rows. Behind her, her father's grave stood silent in the golden light, the inscription unchanged, the promise kept. In her mind, she heard his voice one last time, the way he'd sounded when she was 12 years old, learning to shoot on a California range before wars and betrayals, and 12 years of hunting changed everything. Hit what you aim for, Alexis. Stand for what you believe. The rest is just details. She'd done both. And that Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Kincaid would have said, with that proud smile she still remembered, was all any warrior could ever ask. At Quantico, 500 Marines trained in the Kincaid Protocol were proving every day that legends don't die when the warrior falls. They live on in every lesson taught, every impossible shot made possible, every life saved because someone took the time to teach instead of just accomplish. Sergeant Alexis Kincaid had finished her father's rifle. finished his mission, and built a legacy that would outlast them both. Some wars are won with bullets, others are won through teaching. The best warriors understand which battles require which weapons. Her father had understood that. Now so did she. Alexis Kincaid walked back across the firing line carrying 12 years of grief in a carbon fiber case. The morning sun had climbed higher, turning the desert air into something that stripped away pretense and left only truth. Her boots kicked up red dust with each step, the same dust that had covered her father's coffin at Arlington, the same dust that filled Helmand Provin's air when betrayal wore a friendly uniform and fired a bullet that ended Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Kincaid's war. Behind her, the 6 Marines of Whiskey Range had gone silent. Not the comfortable silence of professionals at work, but the heavy quiet of people who just realized they'd been living next to something dangerous without knowing it. Lex reached the firing line barrier and set the case down on a shooting bench with reverence that bordered on worship. Her fingers found the latches, paused. 18 months of invisibility ending because she couldn't watch warriors drown when she knew how to save them. $3 million of training, a mission that mattered, all of it imploding in real time. Her father had spent 26 years teaching her something simpler than operational protocols. Do the right thing even when it costs everything. The latches clicked open. Colonel Bridger moved closer, his weathered face showing nothing but his eyes held memories of another Kincaid, another rifle, another lifetime when a young lieutenant colonel had been the finest shot in the Marine Corps. Take your time, Sergeant, Bridger said quietly. Only Lex heard the weight in those words, the history that connected them through her father's legacy. She lifted the lid. The rifle lay in custom-cut foam like a religious icon. Remington 700 action, Macmillan carbon fiber stock in desert tan, Krieger match-grade barrel that could put 5 rounds through a quarter-size hole at 1,000 yards. The Schmidt and Bender scope mounted on top cost $19,000 and represented the absolute peak of precision optics engineering. But none of that was what made Houston Reed's breath catch in his throat. It was the inscription, hand engraved into the stock, filled with black enamel so it would never fade, never be forgotten, never let the shooter forget why she pulled the trigger. For Alexis, hit what you aim for, stand for what you believe. Dad, 2011. The words hung in the air like a promise carved in steel and sealed in memory. Daphne Carver read them over Houston's shoulder. Her hand went to her mouth, understanding flooding in before her brain caught up. "Oh my God," she whispered. "That rifle is older than some of our equipment. He built this for you." Lex ran her fingers across the engraving, felt the grooves her father's hands had carved in a garage outside Camp Pendleton, where a Marine colonel spent his evenings building a gift for a daughter who'd begged him to teach her to shoot. She remembered being 14, 5 rounds into a single hole at 600 yards, her father's pride lighting up his face like sunrise. She remembered being 15, the phone call that began with, "We regret to inform you," and ended with the shattering of every promise about soldiers coming home. Her hand trembled. Just once. Then she was Sergeant Alexis Kincaid again. Defense Intelligence Agency, 43 operational deployments, expert rating on 16 weapon systems. A classified kill count that would have horrified the teenage girl who'd learned to shoot on her father's custom rifle. Master Sergeant Voss found his voice. It came out hoarse, stripped of the certainty that had defined his career. "Ma'am, where did you acquire that weapon system?" Lex looked at him. Really looked. Saw past the bluster and fear to the man underneath. A father trying to provide. A Marine trying to maintain a legacy built on perfection. Someone drowning and too proud to ask for help. "My father started building it in 2010. Took him almost a year to source the parts machine, the components perfect, every detail. He died before he could finish it. I spent the last 12 years completing what he started." She lifted the rifle from the case. The movement was fluid, practiced, automatic. The weapon settled into her hands like it had been grown there. "He was going to give it to me on my 18th birthday, August 2012. He died 3 weeks before that birthday." Taliban sniper, the official report said. 800 yards. Clean shot through the scope. Lex worked the bolt. Smooth. Perfect. 10,000 repetitions made muscle memory. The classified report I wasn't supposed to see said something different. said betrayal from inside the wire, said a targeting laser painting him for a shot that should never have been possible from the enemy's position, said there was a traitor in his unit, someone he trusted with his life, someone who valued blood money more than brotherhood. She looked down at her father's words carved in the stock, the promise that had driven 12 years of hunting. I finished this rifle because I made him a promise, that I'd complete what he started, that I'd find the man who killed him, that I'd make sure no other Marine died because someone sold honor for cash they couldn't spend with clean hands. The silence that followed was absolute. In the visitor area, Tyler Voss stopped breathing. His phone camera recorded what his memory would never forget the moment his understanding of his father changed forever. Colonel Bridger cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice carried decades of weight. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Kincaid was the finest Marine I have ever had the privilege to train. Advanced Marksmanship Course 2003. He came to my program already an expert, left it a master. Bridger looked at Lex. Something passed between them. Understanding forged in shared loss. When they showed me the file on the DIA operative for Operation Ghostwalker 18 months ago, I saw the name Kincaid, saw the qualification scores, knew immediately Garrett taught his daughter well. Voss felt the world shifting like sand beneath him. Sir, you've known who she was this entire time. I've known there was a federal operative conducting assessment on this base. I was told to maintain distance and report if the operation was compromised. Bridger's eyes locked on Voss like targeting lasers. You just compromised it, Master Sergeant, because you couldn't show basic respect to someone you assumed was beneath you. The range safety officer approached clipboard, forgotten, drawn by the weapon like sailors to sirens. Ma'am, I need to inspect that rifle before any demonstration. Range safety protocols. Lex handed him the weapon without hesitation. The RSO took it like it might explode, ran his hands along the barrel, checked the chamber, examined the scope mounting system with the careful attention of someone who knew the difference between equipment and art. Jesus Christ, he breathed. This is flawless. The barrel work alone is probably $6,000. The trigger job is precision machined to 2 pounds. The bedding is glass and pillar absolutely perfect. These scope rings are spore mounts, bomb-proof, and $300. He sighted through the scope, checked parallax, tested the turrets. Ma'am, what kind of groups does this system shoot? Sub-minute of angle at 1,000 yards. Half-minute if I do my part. Quarter-minute on a good day with perfect conditions. The RSO handed the rifle back like he was returning a holy relic. This weapon is cleared for range use. God help anyone on the wrong end of it. Lex accepted the rifle, felt its familiar weight, the balance point her hands found without thinking, the cheek weld that fit her face like it had been carved to her measurements, because it had been. She turned to face the 6 Marines who represented everything wrong with modern warfare. Technology over skill, data over instinct, expensive equipment replacing hard-won expertise. Before I take this shot, she said, her voice carrying authority that made grown warriors straighten unconsciously, you need to understand what you've been doing wrong. Not because I want to embarrass you, because understanding the problem is the first step to fixing it. Houston Reed grabbed his notebook, ready to learn, ready to salvage something from the wreckage of this morning. Lex pointed downrange. Her hand moved in arcs and lines that painted invisible pictures in the air. You see one target at 1,700 yards, one wind environment, one set of conditions to calculate. Your computer sees the same thing: surface wind 15 miles per hour from the northwest, temperature 94 degrees, barometric pressure, humidity, all perfect data, mathematically verified, completely accurate. She lowered her hand. And completely insufficient for making this shot, because you're not shooting through one environment. You're shooting through 4 distinct atmospheric layers that your sensors can't measure and your computers can't predict. She walked to the barrier, gestured to the mountains, the valley, the terrain that had defeated the best equipment money could buy. Layer 1, surface wind, 8 feet to maybe 50 feet altitude. That's what your flags measure. 15 miles per hour northwest. Your computer sees this perfectly. No problems with the data. Layer 2, mid-range thermals, 300 to 1,200 yards. The valley floor heats unevenly, Dark rocks absorb radiation faster than sandy areas, creates rising columns of hot air that push crossways to the surface wind. Watch the grass at 1,000 yards. Daphne moved closer, scope raised following Lex's explanation. See how it bends toward us, Lex continued. Even though surface wind pushes away, that's layer 2, invisible to your sensors, visible to patient observation. Houston looked through his scope, stared. 10 seconds. 20. Then his whole body jerked. Holy hell, she's right. The grass is moving opposite direction from what our equipment says. Layer 3, high-altitude flow. Above 1,500 feet, different weather system entirely. Usually steady, usually weak, but it affects the bullet's terminal phase. Watch the dust on the ridge behind the target. Drifts east, while everything else moves west. Daphne tracked to the ridge, saw it, understood, felt something like conversion dawn in her chest. And layer 4 is what's been killing you all morning. Thermal inversion at 900 yards. Rock formation there absorbs solar radiation. By this time of day, hot enough to create a rolling thermal current that reverses wind direction in a 40-second cycle. Lex turned back to face them. Your computer can't measure this. Your sensors can't predict this. Your expensive equipment is calculating a firing solution for conditions that don't exist. You're shooting through three-dimensional atmospheric chaos that changes every 40 seconds using two-dimensional data that's accurate but irrelevant. The silence stretched like wire about to snap. Bridger stepped forward. His voice carried 4 decades of teaching warriors. What Sergeant Kincaid is describing is environmental reading, the oldest sniper skill in existence. Before computers, before lasers, before calculators, snipers had to read their environment, really read it, feel it, understand it like they understood their own breathing. He gestured to the expensive equipment. Technology is a magnificent tool, but it's not a replacement for hard-won expertise. It's supposed to confirm what your eyes tell you, not replace what your brain calculates. Bridger looked at Voss. You've spent so much time trusting your equipment that you forgot how to trust yourself. That's not your fault. That's what we've trained you to do. But it's wrong. Voss felt those words land like artillery rounds, felt every excuse crumble to dust. Lex lifted her rifle, moved to the firing position. Her movements were economical, born from 10,000 repetitions until there was no wasted motion, no unnecessary adjustment, nothing but shooter and weapon and target. She settled behind the scope, found her cheek welled, adjusted parallax. Her breathing slowed, automatically dropping into the rhythm that made precision possible. I need 3 minutes to read the full environmental cycle. Watch what I watch. Learn what I'm learning. Her eyes began tracking. Grass movement at 400 yards. Mirage shimmer at 800. The rolling heat distortion at 900 that marked the thermal inversion zone. Dust drift on the far ridge. The slight shimmer above the primary target showing thermal rise from sun-heated steel. She was reading the mountain like a book written in wind and heat and invisible currents. Houston scribbled notes, trying to capture in words what Lex was doing with instinct and experience, trying to translate mastery into something teachable. Daphne watched through her spotting scope, tracking everywhere Lex's muzzle pointed, seeing for the first time what had been invisible before. The mountain wasn't static, wasn't predictable, wasn't something you could reduce to sensor data. The mountain was alive. Surface wind holding steady, Lex murmured, more to herself than the audience, falling into the meditative state where nothing existed except environment and calculation. Mid-level crosswind showing variance, 9 miles per hour southwest gusting to 11. Thermal inversion completing current cycle. She watched the grass at 900 yards, saw the shimmer change direction as the hot air column completed its rotation, saw the convergence window approaching when all 4 atmospheric layers would briefly align. High altitude flow minimal, 2 miles per hour east, acceptable for terminal ballistics. Her breathing slowed further. 4 seconds in, hold. 6 seconds out, hold. The rhythm that dropped heart rate steadied muscles made the impossible merely difficult. Thermal cycle converging, 90 seconds. Bridger stood motionless, watched a daughter honor her father's legacy, remembered training the man who'd built this rifle, taught this girl, died for a country that never knew his real enemy wore a friendly uniform. 60 seconds. Voss felt his career ending, felt every decision, every assumption, every moment of arrogance coming due like a debt he couldn't pay. 45 seconds. The wind paused. Even the mountain seemed to hold its breath. 30 seconds. Mid-level convergence approaching. Lex's finger found the trigger. 90% of the pressure already applied, just waiting for the final permission. 20 seconds. Mirage pattern aligning. Houston Reed stopped writing, stopped breathing, watched environmental reading become prophecy. 15 seconds. Daphne's scope tracked to the first target. Waited. 1,700 yards of empty air between the bullet and vindication. 10 seconds. Surface wind, steady, thermals converging. The world contracted to a point. The rifle, the shooter. The mountain's breath exhaling one perfect moment of alignment. 5 seconds. In the visitor area, Tyler Voss leaned forward, watching his father's world either end or transform. 3, 2. Lex exhaled half her breath, held the rest, felt the rifle settle into the natural pause between heartbeats. 1. The trigger broke like ice. The sound of the shot was thunder that rolled across the valley and returned as echoes from 3 mountain faces. The rifle recoiled smoothly, absorbed by Lex's body position and the rifle's muzzle brake. She rode the recoil return to the scope, watched downrange for an outcome she'd calculated with environmental reading and 12 years of muscle memory. 2.8 seconds of flight time. Every Marine on the line had optics raised, watching, waiting, breath held. 1,700 yards away, the first target rang like a church bell announcing salvation. The distinctive sound of copper-jacketed lead striking hardened steel at 2,800 feet per second. But Lex had calculated the angle, had factored the steel's hardness coefficient, had aimed for a specific point 6 inches left of center where the bullet would fragment but retain 80% of its mass. The deflection was perfect. The bullet screamed off the first target at a 17-degree angle, tumbling, slightly fragments, spreading into a pattern that looked random, but followed laws of physics as old as Newton. 0.4 seconds later, the second target sang out, 2,000 yards from the firing line, a shot most snipers would never attempt. Hit by a ricochet that had traveled 300 yards after deflection, following a ballistic path that existed only in the intersection of mathematics and mastery. The remaining bullet core deflected again, smaller now, slower, but still carrying enough energy and following a trajectory Lex had calculated while reading grass movements in thermal shimmer. 2,200 yards from where she lay, the third target completed the symphony. 3 targets, 1 shot. Impossible made routine. The silence that followed was the silence of professionals who just watched their reality rewritten. Then Houston Reed started laughing. Not mockery, not disbelief. The slightly unhinged laughter of someone whose entire understanding of ballistics had just been rebuilt from scratch. "That's not possible," he said through the laughter. "That shot violates about 17 different—" "It violates nothing," Bridger interrupted quietly. "It obeys every law of physics. It simply requires understanding those laws at a level most people never achieve." Daphne lowered her spotting scope. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from awe. "Ma'am, how long have you been able to do that?" Lex sat up from the rifle. "Engage the safety." Her movements were practiced, automatic, the ritual of someone who'd fired precision shots in places where safety protocols meant life and death. "My father taught me to read wind when I was 12 years old, taught me ricochet ballistics when I was 16. Her voice carried the weight of memory. He said a warrior who understands the environment is worth 10 warriors who only understand equipment. I've spent the last 12 years proving he was right. She stood, lifted the rifle. The movement shifted her faded work shirt slightly. Just enough. Just for a second. Underneath, partially visible, was something that didn't belong on a groundskeeper. Tactical vest, subdued tan, government issue. The kind designed to be worn under civilian clothes. The kind that cost $3,000 and required classified authorization to possess. Houston saw it first. His notebook slipped from his hands, caught by the lanyard around his neck. Daphne's eyes went wide. "Ma'am, what?" Lex realized what they'd seen, considered adjusting her shirt to hide it. decided the moment had passed. The cover was blown anyway. She pulled the work shirt open wider. Let them see. The tactical vest was fully visible now. Load-bearing equipment for magazines, communications gear, medical supplies. Everything a federal operator needed for missions that never made the news. On the left side, a patch that made Voss's blood run cold. Delta Force insignia. Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The kind of unit that didn't officially exist and trained warriors for operations that were never acknowledged. On the right side, a name tape that ended all speculation. SGT-A Kincaid USMC. Houston's voice came out strangled. Kincaid, Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Kincaid, Medal of Honor, Helmand Province 2012. He looked up at Lex, understanding crashing over him in waves. You're his daughter. Before Lex could respond, the sound of rotors began building from the south. Fast, low, the distinctive rhythm of a UH-60 Blackhawk flying tactical profile, the kind used for emergency insertions and time-critical extractions. Lex closed her eyes, felt 18 months of work evaporate, felt the mission she'd sacrificed everything for slip away because she couldn't watch good Marines fail. Her father would have done the same thing. That didn't make it hurt less. She opened her eyes, looked at the 6 Marines who'd just learned more in 30 minutes than most people learned in careers. Everything you saw this morning is classified, she said quietly. My identity, my capabilities, the techniques I taught you. Everything stays between us until you're cleared to share it. Understood. 6 voices simultaneous. Yes, ma'am. The helicopter crested the ridge, dropping fast, side doors open, 4 figures visible inside. Command staff and federal agents and the machinery of government moving to contain a compromise that couldn't be allowed to spread. Lex picked up her rifle case, began securing her father's weapon with movements that had become prayer. The promise carved in steel had been kept this morning. Not the promise to hunt the man who'd killed him that would come later in Prague with justice delivered through a scope at 800 meters. This morning's promise was simpler, to help warriors who needed help, to teach when teaching mattered more than missions, to be the kind of Marine her father had been, all of it ending because she'd chosen to be human instead of just operational. The Black Hawk touched down in a cloud of dust and fury. Before the engines began winding down, Colonel Marcus Talbot emerged, face carved from stone, followed by 2 men in business suits carrying credentials that ended conversations before they began. Talbot's voice carried across the range like artillery fire. Sergeant Kincaid, your cover is compromised. We need to talk. Now. Lex secured the final latch on her rifle case, stood straight, met Talbot's eyes with the calm of someone who'd made the right choice for the wrong reasons and would do it again without hesitation. Yes, sir, I'm ready. Behind her, 6 Marines watched a legend walk toward a helicopter that would carry her back into shadows they'd never see. Watched a woman who'd sacrificed her mission to teach them lessons that would save their lives in places where technology failed, and instinct was all that stood between warriors and body bags. Master Sergeant Clayton Voss stood apart from his team, alone in the way that only the disgraced can be alone, watching his career board that helicopter alongside the woman who'd destroyed it by being everything he'd failed to be. Competence, character, the courage to help when helping had a cost. As the Blackhawk's engine spooled up, Lex looked back one final time, made eye contact with each Marine, lingered on Voss longest. Then she was gone, disappeared into the sky, back to the shadows where legends lived and missions waited and federal operators did work that would never make the news. The dust settled slowly, the morning sun climbed higher, and on Whiskey Range, 6 Marines stood holding diagrams and notes and knowledge that would change everything about how they fought their wars. The impossible shot would be talked about for years. But the real lesson about respect and humility and understanding that mastery looks like patience instead of arrogance would last forever.